Welcome to Bolivan with Chris. My name is Chris. I'll be your host for this. And here's my team. Alright delegates, so you've made it through all the beginner delegate videos. Welcome to the advanced series. We're going to talk about crisis committees, we're going to talk about the ins and outs of crisis, we're going to talk about some other tips and tricks that we don't actually, maybe not would recommend to beginner delegates because they just might not be able to wrap their head around quite so fast, right? So this is going to be a couple videos, probably one on crisis committees and then one on the tips and tricks, and then that should be it. So let's dive right into the crisis information. So if you know me, I'm a crisis guy, first and foremost. However, I do enjoy the occasional GA or specialized committee as well. Crisis is a lot of fun, and it's considered one of the hardest committees for a variety of reasons, right? It's fast-paced, a lot of the stronger delegates like to enter crisis committees, and there's just a lot of stuff going on. It's a lot of work for one person, which is why typically at all UN conferences, crisis committees often have partners. And that's something that you need to learn with, to work with as well. Working with, delegating with a partner is very different than delegating as an individual, right? So there's a lot of things that we can discuss about that, but let's just talk about the basics of a crisis committee, all right? So if you're here, I'm assuming you kind of know what a crisis committee is, but in case you don't, I'm going to go over that. So crisis committees are something where we have basically a regular kind of standard crisis committee, which is basically what the Security Council kind of does. They do pass resolutions in the Security Council, but there's a crisis aspect to it that's typically also simulated, or actually practiced rather, by the actual Security Council, alright? So that's something that I'm going to talk about, and then we'll branch off to other things. So the Security Council is the main body, the main authoritative body within the UN that actually has very strong power in terms of taking action. So the Security Council has the 15 members, 5 permanent members being China, UK, France, USA, and Russia, victors of World War II. And from there, they'd be able to have the power to veto resolutions. Now, first and foremost, if you're in Security Council, veto should honestly be very, very, very rarely used, alright? Which is why basically all nations in Security Council should be saying present, not present in voting ever, alright? The last time vetoes have been used, at least within this time period, it's honestly Russia might have done one on Syria, literally one or two, alright? And then USA might have done one or two on Israel a few years back. China might have done one or two on terrorism for whatever reason. Likewise with France. Countries really don't use their veto. It happens probably once every 2 to 4 years, alright? Look that up online as well. Even Wikipedia has an article on that, so you can see which ones have been vetoed and why, right? It's usually just a very specific clause that 2 nations have been going at it against. So again, if you're in the Security Council, you should be saying present, shouldn't be really using your veto, right? And if you're chairing the Security Council, so I'm assuming if you're doing the Security Council, you're probably also experienced delegate who might be chairing. It's also very important to understand that delegates should not be using their ability to veto, and you should frown upon that and actually inform delegates of that. Alright, so from there, let's move on. So there's kind of 3 main things that happen within crisis committees, alright? So they do pass resolutions in the Security Council, UFC does that, but there's also the added crisis element. The crisis element itself is typically what we do at Churchill, alright? So there's something that's called an action order, alright? Then we have something that's called a communique, and then the last one is also called a directive, alright? So these are the differences between them. Let's start off with the communique. Communique is just a message, basically typically to your crisis staff to simulate talking to someone else. That can be as simple as, if you're the delegate of the USA, asking the White House for information, contacting the CIA, contacting the director of the FBI, whatever it might be, tapping into your national resources, within your own resources, going afar, asking them for information, and you typically would expect a reply from the crisis. Alright? That's kind of the main thing. You want things to be pretty specific, otherwise it can give you vague answers. Crisis staff, proper crisis staff should be giving you vague answers if your questions are not specific enough, right? So yeah, communiques, again, with crisis, everything should be super specific. So let's talk about action orders, and then we'll talk about directives. So action orders are typically what we call either unilateral or bilateral or multilateral. So unilateral, you do it yourself, your own country does it, right? Bilateral, you do it with another country, and multilateral, 3 or more countries participate in an action or an event. So this can be something such as when the USA invaded the Middle East in the Gulf War after 9/11. That was, they informed the Security Council, and that was bilateral or multilateral action order where they deploy their own troops. That's something within your own country's jurisdiction. You don't really need you don't need to vote on that. Okay, that just happens. You can make them secret as well. All right, you can send in. U.S. does that. You can send in Navy SEALs to do whatever, carry out a mission. Right, this should be super specific so things don't go wrong. Do your research. I've made that mistake myself, where you have a little bit of misinformation. You have the wrong number of troops. You send the wrong battalion of troops, where they're not actually equipped for that kind of terrain or whatever it might be, and the mission does not go well. So make sure you have research on that. It's a difference when you're doing crisis research, all right? But make sure you have all that information, researching your own military, researching your news outlets. That's another thing you can do. Have pay or have your media kind of report on certain things, get information on certain things, report certain things. Have, especially if the U.S. have someone like the White House actually release a statement, that's pretty powerful in and of itself. There's a lot of different things you can do. Have fun with that action order, be careful with it, but it's also super important that you do a lot of that, because that's what really gets you the awards in crisis, all right? Don't forget to be still present while doing everything else. You don't get too into the crisis stuff only, all right? So with that in mind, let's talk about directives. These are basically the same thing as resolutions, however they're actually actions, alright? So they're not as formal, we don't really need the prompt words, although personally I find that very helpful, just whatever prompt words I have in my head. There's no preamble for any of these, alright? And it should just jump right into operative, and it should be really specific to the point what you're going to do, when we're going to do it, why we're doing it, kind of a thing. And you present it. Alright, you'd have sponsors just as the same, signatories just as the same, you would vote on it, you get it passed, it happens, you see what happens back from crisis, alright? Again, specifics are super important. There's not much else to actually kind of talk about this in terms of what you can do, what you can say, or no, you can say what you can do, what you can write, but again, you can look this up online, or as always, look to your fellow delegates. There's always going to be individuals who do particularly well in crisis, and you can discuss with them some of their tips and tricks, and perhaps they can give you some further insight, right? So that kind of wraps up the initial part of what we're going to discuss in terms of crisis committees and how the Security Council works. This also applies to most historic committees as well. However, they'll simulate their crisis differently. Conferences have their own little tips and tricks. Things will happen. Crisis is pretty fun. There's a lot of things that are happening on the fly all the time. Those are the 3 main things you need to worry about, right? Communiques, action orders, and directives. Those are the kind of main things that you can do as a delegate in the Security Council or other crisis committee. Other thing that's super important, writing notes, keeping on your feet, always paying attention, always knowing what's going on, paying attention to crisis updates. Don't ask your crisis director for crisis updates when they're not relevant, and you should be playing both sides. It's important and to be able to be a delegate just as the same as in the GA or any other committee, to be strong in the front room. The background is even more important, and the crisis aspect is also even more important to be able to send those notes in. You're sending something into crisis personally all the time. Something's always going into crisis, and you should always be getting something back, alright? You should always make sure that you're also very present in the front room, and you should be, because of that crisis background, you should be able to influence some of the other delegates to join your side. This is also particularly helpful if you're a larger country. However, if you are a smaller country, you ask larger countries to do something, but you send in the note to the crisis staff saying that you are sponsoring this action order or whatever it might be, alright? So that's what you kind of do. Small countries band together, especially in something like the Security Council. Work within your blocks, work within your allies. Crisis committees are fast, don't piss people off, don't backstab anyone, technically speaking, usually anyways. And try to be nice, as we talked about before. Making sure you make friends and have positive experience from all you, and is more important per se than actually winning the awards or trying to get that gavel. You don't want to be that guy. So keep all those things in mind. I'll be back with some more information on what you need to kind of research and some other tips and tricks. That kind of concludes the crisis video for now, and I'll see you guys in the next chapter.